before I dissect further into the pig, I did want to show you one structure that will be damaged as I completely dissect the pig here. I don't know what the best way to have you see it, but if you see this thin flap that's sitting right on top of the liver, all right, looks like a tissue. That is actually a muscle. That is the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is a muscle that sits right below the lungs. It actually helps with breathing, and it helps to separate the thoracic cavity, or the thorax, from the abdominal cavity. So earlier in the lab you were asked what separates the thorax from the abdomen. It's this diaphragm. Again, if you can see that tissue there. Now let's take a look at some of the structures associated with the thorax, or the thoracic cavity of the pig. Remember, the thorax is the region from the shoulders until an internal structure in the pig. And let's zoom in and I'll show you where that internal structure is. So we're kind of zooming in on the thorax right now, the thoracic cavity. The internal structure that separates the thorax from the abdomen, which is posterior to it, is this muscle, right? This muscle that I'm holding in my fingers, it looks like a thin flap of tissue, right? Not the dark brown thing, but this thin flap of tissue. This is the diaphragm. The diaphragm helps with breathing. It pushes up and pushes down as you breathe, or as the pig breathes as well. Largely, when we take a look at the thoracic cavity, the organs that we see here are associated with the circulatory system and the respiratory system. So, of course, right in the center here, you can see the heart on our fetal pig. Just like us as humans and all mammals, the fetal pig has a 4-chambered heart. So there are 4 parts to it. The 2 upper chambers of the heart, which are here in dark brown, you've got one here and one here. These are called the atria. And then the 2 lower chambers of the heart, here on this side and here on this side, those are the ventricles. Now, the way left and right works for a pig is you have to put yourself in the pig's perspective, or the pig's shoes. What would the pig call its left? What would the pig call its right? So if we look at the 4 chambers and try to figure out what's left and right, I'll say this atrium up here at the top, this is the right atrium. The right atrium will then pump blood into the right ventricle. The right ventricle is quite muscular compared to the atrium. From the right ventricle, blood then gets pumped to the pulmonary trunk, which will carry blood to the lungs. That's where the blood gets oxygenated. From the lungs, blood re-enters the heart into the left atrium, which you see up here. And then blood gets pumped from the left atrium to the left ventricle, which is down here. Once blood reaches the left ventricle, when the left ventricle contracts, that will push blood into the aorta, which will then pump blood throughout the body. So of all the 4 chambers, the left ventricle here is actually the most muscular because it pumps blood throughout the body. So there's a lot more places that it needs to reach, right? The other thing you see in the thorax, besides the heart, are the lungs. So you have the lungs here on the right, and you have lungs over here on the left. You'll notice the lungs are made up of lobes, right? They're not just one entire structure. They're made up of smaller lobes, which are divided. All right, so heart and lungs and our thorax.